At InDigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only I3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Here in Greenville County, we have 8 different places where a 911 call can be answered.
It is the largest county in South Carolina. It's a challenge.
The type of information that a telecommunicator gets from Radius Plus is location-based technology. You can see where the caller is, if they have a medical issue, if they speak a different language. They're immediately able to text to that caller in their native language. It reduces response times because it immediately gets first responders where they need to be.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo of the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be episode 423 of Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy and Carbine, and a big shout out to patrons as always. Thank you so much for everything. I wouldn't be able to do everything that I do if it wasn't for all of you, but especially those who are here right now who are listening, watching, supporting, and sharing. Thank you very, very much. There is already a lot of stuff going on. Last night was an epic open mic live. There was so much stuff that was shared. If you missed it, make sure to check out the replay. It's available on demand for you to watch anytime you want on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter. So make sure to check it out there. Also, a little clip of a video that I played last night is going to be going on the podcast page, so you can check it out there. Actually, throughout my social media outlets. So check that stuff out. As always, for patrons, a perk for patrons only is audio versions of the DRT, which is the Dispatchers Roundtable, and Open Mic Live, which is a live broadcast where we share the lighter side of dispatch, 9 p.m. Eastern time every Thursday. And that can be seen on Facebook, again, Twitter and YouTube, and sometimes on Instagram Live. I don't do it all the time on that one. Mostly because it's not all, synced together. I have to have it separately for those who are watching on this little stand, a phone stand, and I have to do it off my phone. One day, I'm hoping they will make something where you're able to do it live with Instagram as well, so it can all be one thing there. But until then, that's how it's going to happen. So again, thank you all so much for joining, and I'm excited to have my guest on today. We've already been talking and laughing so much, so this is going to be a good episode. I cannot wait to hear more about her. And her name is Keely, and she's the executive director of Mountain Valley Communication Center out of New Jersey. Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, it has already been fun.
And a little worrisome, maybe?
No. Trying to wake up a little bit, because we were on for a long time last night, about an hour and a half, and then I don't think I went to sleep until, I don't know, midnight or maybe 1 a.m. I don't know. I don't know why, but for some reason, from laughing with everyone so much and just being in such a good mood, at the end of the show, it's hard to wind down.
Right?
So
I
I
have
have
a
to
hard
like
time
sort of
winding
sit.
down after watching it. So
Oh yeah.
I can imagine it's the same. I missed last night. I'm mad that I missed last night, but I
Oh,
definitely I laughed so hard through the whole thing, and I'm exhausted. I'm tired, but I can't go to bed because I'm still like laughing at some of the things that happen.
yeah. Sometimes I'll go back. I'll remember a piece of it, and I'll be sitting there, and I'm like, I want to go to sleep, but I know I have to look at this really quick, and I'll go back and find the spot and just start busting up all over again, and then I'm just screwed.
Yeah, so I totally get it. Totally get it. I stay up way later than I need to. You need to move that like back an hour for us old folk who can't handle that hour.
I'll try.
It's getting longer and longer, and I'm
Oh, I
dying.
know. So much fun though. It's so much fun. It is good to have you on here. We had an interaction on LinkedIn. And what was funny though is because Sarah Weston and I, Sarah, the executive director and founder of 911 Women Inc., we recently did a live broadcast, Headset Topics with Virtual Academy, and you'd put a comment in there about Imagine Listening and the movement and stuff, and I was when I saw your name pop up on LinkedIn, I thought, is that the same person? So I clicked, and usually when you do a search and you click on a name, it goes to it actually goes to a window before going to your actual profile, which kind of saves you because on LinkedIn they let you know who's looking at your
Right,
profile.
right.
So when I clicked on it, I thought, okay, it's gonna go to the regular window, and it didn't. It went to your actual profile. I thought, son of a bitch. So I scanned really quick and I went away from it. It's so stupid because it's almost like when people call 911, they're like, oh, and
Right.
they accidentally do it and
Hang
they
up.
hang up.
Just kidding.
Yeah, no, it went through either way. So it was just like me clicking on there and going to your profile. It's already registered. So then I get a message from you a little bit afterwards saying something to the effect of, bruh, you're creeping on me and you didn't send a friend request.
Just like
I
you
thought
creeper.
I thought that was the most funny shit because I thought, damn it, it did go through. I was gonna go back. I was gonna go because I had to jump on a call and I was gonna go
Uh-huh.
back really quick and
Sure
then
you
just
were.
hit that button and then you called me out. I was like, damn.
See, this is what happens. You're dealing with a Jersey dispatcher, and we always call you back, and we will always be like, "Hi, you were just stalking me, so I want to know why."
Yes, yeah, you could have easily tracked me down and everything else. that was the most funny shit. I just thought after I read it, I thought, yep, dispatcher
Yeah,
style.
it's totally like we were like called you out on your bullshit. Like,
Oh my god, yeah, because you sent a message afterwards. You're like, lies. I thought, oh man, I have to have this person on because this is gonna be fun. This is gonna be so much fun, and it already has been. This has been good. So let's go back in time here, really quick, and I want to hear about you. I want to hear about your story. So how did you get into dispatching to begin with?
I had a fight with a dispatcher.
Oh,
So
wait a minute, over the phone?
actually, over the radio and over the phone, it was a good time. I was an EMT. I started on the street. I volunteered for my local hometown. I thought to myself, I'm going to go into this EMS world because I have no idea what I want to be when I grow up. And this will be a really great opportunity. And I can get a little bit of my life back and, give back to my town and my community. And then fast forward, I don't know, 3 years later, I had already entered into the paramedic program, and I was heading down the didactic portion of that, and mostly wanted to kill myself at that point because it's a lot of work.
Oh
And
man.
because I already knew so much about the medical end of it, we got dispatched to a call and the dispatcher completely screwed it up. And I knew they screwed it up because
Oh
I was
man.
like, how did you not dispatch this correctly? They didn't send us an ALS unit. So I requested ALS. They were kind of like, didn't meet protocol. I'm like, it does meet protocol. I'm asking for an ALS unit. Give me an ALS unit. So later on, I go back and call over to dispatch and ask to speak to the supervisor, who is a police captain, or actually he was a sergeant at the time.
Mhm.
So you know how that goes, dealing with the police. So,
Yeah.
so so even harder personalities than dispatchers. So
Mhm.
he drives over to the squad. They're right next door to each other, and he drives over to the squad and he throws down the complaint form in front of me so that I can fill it out. And so I'm sitting there filling it out, and then he takes it back, like snatches it from in front of me, and then throws this 23-page application in front of me. And he's like, if you think you can do it better, apply. So I did.
Oh shit! Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted, bitch. So yeah, so that's how I got there. That was in 1999, BC,
Oh
and
man.
before I became a jaded, bitter adult. So I went into this not really knowing what to expect, but knew a little bit of it because I had already been doing in the field stuff. And I remember walking into that room, and my training officer at the time, Betty, God rest her soul, she she looked at me and she like got in my face. She's like, "You're not going to survive here." And I was like, my eyes were like as big as saucers. I was like, "Oh my God, what do you mean I'm not going to survive here?" And I'm watching her. And at that time, we had one terminal,
Mhm.
and it was a dot matrix screen.
Oh my god.
I'm old. So I'm watching her toggle back and forth between CGIS and CAD and other screens, and she's doing it so fast. And I'm going, what did I just get myself into? What is happening? Like, I was terrified. I'm standing behind her, like just looking at everything, and then like 911 rings, and I'm like, oh my God, there's things happening all at the same time. And yeah, so
Jeez.
that's how my career started. And basically my training was, she was, don't get me wrong, she was stern, and I respect that, because I don't think I would have survived if she had not been as hard on me as she was.
Mhm.
But she also, it was more like, here's the radio, here's the phone, don't fuck it up. And that was it.
Oh man. Okay, so
And
this was 99, right?
1999, yes.
So I graduated in 99, and 2 years later though was when I started in dispatch. I was 19 when I started.
I think I was
And
20. I was 20, and 5 days later I turned 21, and they all got me drunk. Ever get drunk with a bunch of police officers and dispatchers? It's a scary time.
Oh man, yes.
But it's a good time.
Oh,
Yeah.
so let me say this really quick. So the first time I brought my brother, who was newly 21, with me to hang out with a bunch of officers, we're standing there and he's like babysitting a beer. He's just standing there with the can, and I'm like, dude, are you all right? And he goes, bro, it's just really weird because I'm here drinking with police officers. And I said, what? And he goes, yeah. And one of my buddies kind of overheard him, and he walks over and he goes, hey man, don't worry about it. He goes, we're just like you. Like, we're people just like you. There's nothing weird. He goes, I don't know. It's just weird. Like, I feel like I'm breaking a law or something because I'm drinking with you guys or something like that. I was like, nah, man, it's all good.
Yeah, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Uh,
It's definitely an interesting group of people when you get out in that environment, because
oh, for sure.
you're thinking to yourself, oh God, I'm going to do something wrong. And they're going to be like, next day at work, what did you do last night?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like the judgment, the shame.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
You'll walk in like, oh God, I hope nobody sees me coming in.
So all of this started with an argument.
It all started with an argument. That's how
Wow.
it started, with an argument with a dispatcher, and basically a challenge to do better. And that dispatcher actually ended up, not because of my complaint, but because of a number of other complaints, he was told to resign. I'm still friends with him to this day, which is a whole other story. But yeah, so it was just kind of one of those moments of, well, I'm not doing anything else. I was working part-time as an EMT to make some money and I was working as a babysitter. So like while I'm in paramedic school, well, I can do a dispatch thing, right? No problem. Yeah,
So how many years have you been in public safety then altogether? Not just dispatch, but altogether in public safety?
25, 26, 26, 26 years. Yeah.
So it's interesting, especially with your title now, that way back then, what started out as a challenge seems to be you continuing to take up on that challenge to
It
make
was.
things better.
It absolutely was. And if you knew me personally, you would probably think, wow, she took that and ran with it. She definitely was like, oh, you watch, you watch. And that's what happened. Yeah. He like I said, he's still friends with me today and laughs
Yeah.
about it. We laugh about it now. But it really was like, I think it was the smugness of the sergeant when he
Mhm.
threw the application down at me. It was like, really? Like, this is all right. Here I go.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, that's awesome though, because you ended up taking that energy and you turned it into something else. But also when you get in there, you've got this trainer who's firm with you and challenging and everything. And I love how you gave the description as well. I always like to know, and of course for the listeners and people who watch, to know as well, like when you walk in there, what is it that you're looking at? What was that feeling for you? Was it overwhelming and all this other stuff? Because I remember when I walked in the very first time in the first center in Central Florida, it was a small police department, and it was just when you open the door, there was a little lobby area, and right on the other side of this little like glass that anyone could easily reach over to was dispatch where we were at. And we had multiple monitors, but they're not like the monitors that we have now. They were these CRT, these big, thick monitors and stuff.
I
And
sent you the picture of mine. That
yes,
was my terminal.
yeah, it looks similar. Yeah, it looks similar to what I had at the center, or at the police department rather. And my trainer was, I'll use the word seasoned. He
That's
was
a
rather
great word.
seasoned. Yeah. and
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 bitter.
yeah, a little bit. And I watched him take one phone call, and then it was my turn. And I remember kind of freaking out a little bit because I thought, is there nothing else? Like, there's no other training? And he's like, basically common sense. And you got to jump into it, or else you're not going to learn. Like, you got to jump in and do it on the job. And I'm like,
Trial
okay,
by fire. That's what I was told.
yeah.
Sink or
And
swim. Now's your chance.
yeah, well, so I did end up having like a 40-hour beginner's dispatcher course that I went to a few weeks later, but that's how it was. I just jumped in and started doing everything. I was learning all the codes and the radio, and there's a 3-digit code that I had to punch in to even have the tones go out for fire rescue. I mean, it was craziness. Didn't know, but also the other thing too was they never I was never told like you're going to be dealing with some hard shit, like from these calls. No one ever said anything like that. But then we get into the training and everything else. So then, like for you, you kind of talked a little bit about that trainer that you had, but what was the training process like? Like, was there 3 different phases that you had to go through? Did you have to learn the geography first and then codes, but then go on the phones? Like, how did it work out for you?
So obviously, we had to get our certifications.
Hmm.
One of the dispatchers at the time, he was a certified instructor. So they took us over to the squad building and they did some training with us. And it was basically like, the basics, the liability, the ins and outs, the ethics, that sort of stuff for your basic. And then they started doing the EMD portion of it, the medical dispatch portion of it. And we were using phone calls, like the phones in the building, to call each other from different rooms and pretend to actually take these 911 medical emergencies. We had to go through all the ones that were on the guide cards. So we had to do call taker, call dispatcher, and then do be the caller. And I remember this one time I took a call. My poor friend, Robin, oh, that poor girl. She was actually working for a different jurisdiction, and I was her caller. And I was telling her that, I was screaming. And I was telling her my boyfriend was having difficulty breathing and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, okay, well, she's trying to go through the cards. And, we're new to this. So you're trying to flip through the cards. Like, oh, God, what are we doing? Because they were cards, not actually on a screen where you could click stuff.
Right.
So they were physical, Stone Age. They were slates. We we definitely flipped the cards. So she's trying to, you can tell she's struggling to flip the card. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, he's breathing just fine when I'm not standing on his chest. So so I turned it into a domestic violence call.
Oh, that is great.
And so like our instructor was like, oh, well, this is one of those moments where that switches gears. And I've always started with that, throughout my career, you always get that one nugget of information on the call. And it's like, well, that changes everything. And I keep saying I'm going to write a book, and that's what it's going to be called. Well, that changes everything. And that was the first, well, that changes everything moment was in my training where I created it. And yeah, that's all it was. We got our certifications, we took our test, we passed the class, we got back into the 911 center, and it was bam, here's this 3-ring binder that's about this big, and that's your book of knowledge. That's what it was called. And that's where you go to get all of your information from.
Oh, man.
And you like read through it. They gave you like days and days of policy reading. Trying not to nod off on the desk while you're reading all of those policies that 90% of them don't pertain to you, because you're in an accredited department. So they had really, really, really deep policies. And then Article Section 15.900, it was communications. And you were still reading all of these policies, and you're reading through the book of knowledge. And that was all you had. We were guide cards, the flip charts, and book of knowledge and policies. And it was like, okay, answer the phone. Wait, what? I'm going to do this now? Okay. Oh, all right. And that was the process. I think that's come a long way, because we, the people who come from that realm, were like, wow, this has to be done better. Because this is where you lose people. And we did. We lost. There were 7 of us that were hired at the time. And I think at the end, 4 of us remained initially. And then it was down to like 3 of us, and then I was the last man standing as that rotation went through. So
holy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting, right? When you get into the first part of the training, and you're reading all of these different policies, these protocols, and then you have all of the scenarios that you're going through. But then when you pass that part, and then you start answering phone calls, there's nothing that can, like, you can have all the training you want, and you've got the basic concept and everything, but you still don't feel comfortable, right? You don't feel fully comfortable with it. So when you take those first few calls, you've got the knowledge, but it's then putting it all together. And I don't know about you, but for me, I would say it took about 2.5, 3 years before I felt like, really, really, really got this, because there's so many, like, the incident types will be the same, but the situation that it's involved in, that, just like you were saying in that scenario, it's a medical, but it actually, it turned out to be a domestic, that shit happens.
Yes.
That stuff happens where everything changes. And then you're trying to think in your head, like, oh, okay, now you've got all these other variables that are going on. You hear the officers on the radio, and if you're close enough, as you're typing, you probably, you yell it over or say it out loud so that the person on the radio can hear it, to tell them immediately, instead of waiting for you to type.
So I had to be on the phone and dispatching. So
shit. So you're one person.
Well, we were technically 2, but it just depends on what your partner was doing at the time.
That. Yeah, true.
So it was you were responsible for your channel. And yeah, it was, just that pivot moment, like you pivot, because something's changed.
Pivot.
Like something's changed completely. And now you've got to figure out on the fly, okay, well, I've got to change this. I got to update people. I've got to scream out like help, like this is not what you think it is. And there are just so many things, so many incidents like that they don't prep you for. They don't tell you, like, your callers don't read the book. They're not going to give you the scenarios as you got them in class. They're not reading those books. They're not going to answer your questions in order. They're going to keep screaming at you.
Exactly. And that's where you're thinking on your feet and everything. And you have to really kind of be, you have to have that silver tongue to be able to speak and really put everything out there and think outside the box sometimes as well with callers. Like if somebody calls and they're talking and they're saying different things that you're like, did they call the wrong number? But then you start asking yes or no questions, and then you realize there's something going on there, because you're also listening to everything that's going on their end, and you can hear different things in the background, like somebody, breaking something, or someone just kind of mumbling or whatever. And you're like, okay, this shit's going down here. Unknown situation, person can't talk. And then you just go with it.
Yes. It's true.
Oh,
You just like
oh
get
man,
on the phone, you gotta do your thing.
I
And
got
think about
goosebumps.
it. It's
It's taking
it's
me back.
oh, trust me, as you're going through this, I'm thinking about all those calls where that's happened, or all those calls where something immediately changed, and I was like, oh, that's not what it came in as. Oh God, let me
Yeah.
fix that. And it's like, yeah, no, it's just so many different things that are going at you a million miles a minute. And I think that's hard to describe to a newcomer, even hard to describe to people in the field,
Yeah.
because you're doing multiple things and there's multiple variables happening. I had a police officer once who started with us as a dispatcher. We had a major snowstorm come in, and one of the guys were like, oh, don't you wish you were still inside with the cozy dispatchers? He's like, nope. And here's why. I'm going to push that person out of the snowbank. And while I'm doing that, that dispatcher isn't going to talk to me because I'm busy doing that. I'm busy writing this police report. And until I tell her that I'm not busy writing that police report, she's not going to bother me. But right now, she's dealing with your call, my call, the 911 calls, the EMS calls, the fire department. She's dealing with the callers that are mad that the plows have come by and shoveled them back in. She's doing 900 things, and I'm dealing with this motor vehicle accident. So no, I'm good. I'll stay in the snow.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing, right? When you have those out in the field who think they know about the job, and when they walk in, it's completely different because so for example, we had a really bad storm that was going on once, and we there's trees, wires all over the place down, and we were so busy with all of that a couple officers, a deputy and a city officer, came up to help us out. And they, if I remember correctly, they helped out for 1 hour and they were done.
We're
Like
out.
they did not want anything else to do with it. They're like, peace, like you guys can keep this
You guys
job.
need coffee? Bye.
Yeah, yeah, and I think they did. I think they went and got us like food and stuff because nobody could get up. We couldn't do anything, and everyone was having to go to the bathroom and stuff. And
Yeah.
and yeah, they were not with it. They're like, nope, I'd rather be out on the road.
Yeah,
Screw this.
exactly. Because they do one thing at a time out there. That's all they're required to do. And again,
Yes,
not saying it's not it can be a volatile situation for them, but it's different. It's that one volatile situation as opposed to 900 things happening at the same
right.
time.
Yeah, exactly.
You can
Now,
process that easier.
during your training, like, do you remember any of your first calls or early calls?
So this is what actually really funny. So I don't remember much about my in training time because I remember being thrust onto the desk quicker. We just didn't have the staff. It was a really toxic place. Sometimes there was a situation where dispatcher got into a fight with the sergeant and walked off the desk. And basically I got a phone call that was like, we need you here like now. And I was like, oh, I was still in training.
Mhm.
And I came in and like covered the desk that day with another trainee. Like that's where we were. So it was really just here you go, you're responsible. There is a call that I remember the very first time where I was alone because at certain hours we sometimes went down to one dispatcher or your partner went to lunch or whatever, and my partner had left. He'd gone to lunch and it was like 3 a.m. and I am watching TV, feet up on the desk, minding my business, and 911 rings. I have the keyboard in my lap, and the guy very quietly is like, my neighbor's house is on fire. And I immediately sat up and I was like, I'm sorry, sir, what did you say? And he's like, my neighbor's house is on fire. And I was like, oh, okay. Is everybody out of the house? Oh, yeah. They're all standing in my living room. Well, except the dog. He's still inside. And I was like, oh, I said, so everybody's out of the house? Yeah. But the fire is really bad. And I was like, okay. So I'm transmitting the fire department, still talking to this guy. And I said, all right, do me a favor. Make sure nobody goes back into that house to go get the dog. I was like, just hopefully the front door is open, the dog, hopefully he'll find his way out. I was like, just keep everybody where you are and I have help on the way. And he was like, okay. And he, verified his name, address, did everything for me. And we hung up. The fire department's going, it is a fully involved structure fire. I got one phone call on it. And he was the calmest caller I've ever had in my entire career. He was just like matter of fact, like, oh yeah, the house is on fire and it's pretty bad. I was like, meanwhile, I'm having a small heart attack because this is the first time I'm alone and can't like lean on anybody for answers.
Right.
my heart is pounding out of my chest, and this guy is so matter of fact about what's happening, and I'm having anxiety through the roof. And I don't think that people realize that like our jobs go from sitting there with the keyboard in my lap to right here and then back down here, because as soon as you hang up with the caller, you're kind of back to square one. We don't have that escalation and de-escalation moment in our processing. We go from moment to not moment to moment to not moment. And I think that's really hard, like years and years of doing that. It sort of screws with your response to things. You tend to under respond because you're like, oh yeah, that's, so it's like I kind of wonder, like, was that guy a dispatcher when he he called me? Because he
Right.
was so calm. I've never experienced anything in my entire career. He was my calmest caller.
Wow.
And that was
Yeah.
one of my first all by myself, have to do it calls.
See, and so yeah, that's one of the craziest things about this job is you get some callers who are fully just like hysterical when they're calling, and you have to try to calm them down the best way possible. And when they're just yelling and screaming and all of this, and you're trying to get their information, especially if it's on a cell phone, because there's no exact address on there or anything like that. I mean, the technology is way better than when we both
Way
first
better.
started. Yeah, than when we first
Way
started,
better.
but it's hard to get some of that information. For me, when I first started out in Florida, in that 40-hour training, they had told one of the instructors told us, here's a little trick to get someone to ask if you're on the phone. He goes, it's always happened. It was something that was taught to us, and so I'm going to teach you guys. It was basically just that, when people are yelling and screaming on the phone and you're saying, hello, hello, ma'am, or sir, can you hear me, or whatever, it's just like background noise to them. They're hearing it, but they're really not hearing it. It's there, but it's not there. So if you bring your voice down to a whisper, it kind of tricks them a little bit to, stop, because they don't hear that background noise, and they will stop, and is there somebody there? And the times that I've used it, it has worked every time.
Yep.
So that was one of the things, is getting a hold of them. But then you have the other person who calls, just like you're saying, and who's completely calm, and you're thinking, is this the person who did it,
Right,
or
right.
what is going on? Because I would be freaking out more if the family is in there with me. It at least sound a little panicky, but yeah, there are some people who call in and are just completely stone cold and calm, and you're like, okay, well, I guess this is better than the other
Right.
path, right?
Right. Like, but the thing is, it's funny because then you get the hysterical callers, and it's like, my neighbor's dog won't stop barking, and you're like,
Yes.
really? This is what you're screaming about? Like, calm down. Okay, let's get to the bottom of this. And then you've got these other extremes where it's like these people call in, and you're thinking, where's the panic? This is when you're allowed to panic.
Yes.
It was like there's no panic. There was just nothing. He was just stone cold calm. And I still wonder to this day who that man was. I
Wow.
still think about him.
Yeah, it's the craziest thing when when all of that happens, and then you're trying to process it as well. But man, I remember some of those calls, coming in and talking to people. But as you were saying earlier, that what changed everything, hearing something at the very end, and then I'm like, you know what, the whole priority is different now.
Right.
But the last 2 weeks that I was in dispatch, before I switched to being an industry partner, one of the calls that came in was a disorderly that ended up being like, it ended up being a suicide car crash.
Oh.
But the person just calls and says, this guy was here, he was upset, and going through this whole thing because the person isn't there. And the very end of the phone call, she ends up saying, I think he's suicidal too. Like, okay, like
Lead with that.
that
Lead with that.
that part should have been like in the beginning.
Right.
So then, I've got her phone number, I get off the phone with her, trying to call him, and I end up, as I'm waiting for him to answer, I get another phone call, and we were so busy that I had to end that call to pick up the other one, and it was a person telling me that they had just seen a car go into a tree, and it was that person. So then you end up, at least for me, I end up asking myself, like, if I would have changed my line of questioning, could I have called him faster? Would I have been able to do this?
Right.
I started mapping out the location, like how far was he from the house to the tree, and that one fucked me up.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
You
As
know,
many of them do.
yeah, there was nothing I would have been able to do. It was already, he had already gone. It had already been done by the time I was doing everything else. So yeah, there was nothing I could do. But it took me about 30, maybe 40 minutes of questioning and going over the
Of course.
map and doing all this other stuff to finally be like, no, there's nothing I could have done. But it messed me up.
Right. But I don't think people know that when they call 911 that, like even my comm guy, I'm sure he has no idea that now 20 years later, I still think of him
Hmm.
in like fleeting moments of calmness. Like I want to be that guy in that moment,
Right. I want to be zen. Like I want to be
Zen,
that dude.
that guy. I'm going to channel my inner caller and be like, okay, I need to process this information. Like they don't realize the impacts that they have on our lives, even in the moments. Because what are we, 4 or 5 minutes in to that moment together?
Yeah.
And I still think about those people. And that was 4 or 5 minutes that they touched my life, but they're still in that space with me
Right.
all
Yeah,
the
that
time.
most calm person. Now, because you were saying that in the beginning of all this, you were not only doing like EMT school stuff, but you were also babysitting. So, do you feel like do you feel like your time in babysitting and everything kind of also prepared you for some of the calls that you would end up taking? Because you got to admit, some people who call in, it's like dealing with kids sometimes,
It
trying
is
to get them to
repeating
answer
yourself.
certain things, and yeah, repeating, trying to get things out and all. It's
To
just
be
like
fair,
those who
Jack
work
was
in.
an easy kid, so I don't think he gave
Oh.
me any help. I don't think he helped me at
Oh,
all.
well, I guess that doesn't work out, but but like some people in customer service and all, a lot of that dealing with people, whether it be face to face or over the phone, customer service wise and all, that also helps in a way preparing. A lot of people that I've spoken to have waited tables and done all this other stuff, and a lot of that multitask, that quick thinking and all of that, but also dealing with folks face to face, help them later on for being on the phone.
Sure.
So, but being in EMT school and all of that though, was it hard during, that transition at all? Because, you're used to working hands on and now you're on the phone and your hands are taken away.
So I think that was a struggle, especially since there were things like, when you are in the dispatch center, you have to take your EMT hat off, and there might be
Right.
things that
Yeah.
are going on, but you can't ask the questions off like differently off the guide cards. So you have to sort of set yourself like up for like, I know that this might be different. So you have to change your questions so you can get to where you need to be.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes that would happen to me, whereas like I knew something was different with this caller, and I would change the way that I was asking the question so that I could get them to give me what I needed to give them the ALS response, because what they were telling me wasn't hitting on that. And I'm like, yeah, but this is probably like a AAA. This guy's having, and there were things that I knew in the background, or I knew about a caller, and like every time they call, it's like, and I've been to the house. So I was like, oh, this is nothing more than, Annie M having anxiety again. And she's like, oh, I can't breathe. And you're like, you're breathing just fine because you're screaming at me, but you
Yeah.
can't say those things on the phone. But unfortunately, difficulty breathing is an ALS dispatch, and you're like, oh, so you're trying to like not have to go down that road, but you have to, because that's what the guide guards say. So I think it
Right.
did make it, because there were a lot of times, there was also times where I took the phone call and then went and actually took the call. Because if in the very beginning of my career,
What? Wait a minute.
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So in the very beginning of my career, there were a couple people that worked in the township that took the morning calls. We didn't have a paid service during the day like they do now. So they were short-staffed during the day a lot. And if we toned out and immediately didn't get a crew, my sergeant would be like, go take that. And he would pop himself on the desk and I would go out the door. So I was the call taker, and then I was the person on scene sometimes. And that was in the very beginning of my career. I would say they got away from doing that probably around 2004, I want to say. So for the first good portion of my, doing this, I was not only sometimes the call taker, but I was actually, all right, I'm out, and I would go take the calls. And then sometimes I would get stuck because it would be like Medical Monday, and I'd be out in the ambulance the whole time, and my poor partner's inside taking the beating. So I'd come back to the desk like, sorry,
Oh man.
Yeah, yeah. So I
That,
definitely had an interesting start to my career.
you know, I think that might be a first out of these whole 423 episodes to hear something like that. That is interesting.
Yeah,
So, so for you, in a way, at least in the beginning, when you were doing it like that, the whole thought and concept of closure in this industry, I mean, a little bit of that, I guess, would be okay for you because, probably later on, not because you're not doing
right.
both, but in dispatch, as people know or not know, closure is not a thing that we get all the time.
No.
You go to the next call, but for you, at least in the beginning, there for a little bit, closure was probably not an issue.
No, I mean, in the beginning, and again, it didn't happen often, but it did happen frequently enough that I have plenty of calls that I remember saying to the person on scene, it was me you were talking to. You told me on the phone that you were having this, and now I'm here and you're telling me something different. So it was like I had that different interaction. So it happened enough that I remember these things. And I remember thinking, it gave me a different perspective as a dispatcher that sometimes they're not telling the dispatcher the truth, like the facts, because
Yeah.
and you had to get creative as a dispatcher to get the facts. And I think that definitely gave me that little bit of a leverage because I was like, oh, so this is how things get completely turned around and they get on scene and suddenly the person's in cardiac arrest. And you're like, that's not what you told me on the phone.
Wow.
So it definitely put that perspective on it. And of course it did, but I had also been working in the field for so long that I did get, sometimes I would be able to reach out to people that I knew to get the closure for the dispatchers because I think I recognized very early on what an important role that closure played. And we had a year that things were terrible.
Mhm.
I'm talking in a matter of a few years, we had some very, very, very traumatic incidents occur. And whether I was the person on the other end of the phone or the person in the field, I was at every single critical incident stress debriefing. There must have been like 7 of them. And every time I walked in, the guys were like, really? And I was like, hi, me again. I'll just take my seat over here in the corner. And I feel like I realized very early on that, because we've had these traumatic incidents, we had these things that's like there was something missing from what we were doing for our dispatchers. And the fact that we were brought into critical incident stress was my drive because I had it. I had like I had one of my calls that stick with me was a small child that had actually his brother called. He was probably about 9, and he said that his brother was suffocating. And I was like, okay, what do you mean he's suffocating? And I can hear mom screaming in the background, and she's finally like, who are you talking to? He's like, mommy, I called 911. And she picks up the phone and she's like, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. And it ends up he wanted to crawl into bed with his brother, and he got strangled on the bunk bed, and they found him hours later. And this was my critical incident stress debriefing. My sergeant walked in, he's like, you good? And I was like, yeah, that was really terrible, but yeah, I'm fine. That was all I had. And I remember being like frustrated by it, but also not knowing any better because nobody did anything in that space. So it was kind of like, this is normal for us, right? Like
Yeah.
we just have to deal with it. And I remember, a few years after that kind of being like, maybe somebody should have given me maybe I should have been part of the critical stress because they gave it to all the cops who were on scene. But what about me? The person that was talking to mom and the little boy, like I had that thought process, and we went through this year where we had 7 really awful events, and I was like, we need to make sure that we get in those seats. We get into those critical incident stress debriefings. And I remember the first time being laughed at in one of the critical incident stress debriefings because they start like, we'll start with dispatch, how the call came in, and then what did you see, what did you smell, what did you know? And they kind of moved through the process. And I was laughed at for what happened, what my perspective, what my lens was. And it was involving a drowning. And it was involving a drowning of somebody we knew. And I was on the phone with the caller. Of course, I actually identify myself with the caller so she'll calm down and talk to me. And when our officers got there, all of a sudden there was just radio traffic, and it was Central, get me ALS, get me, and he's just screaming. And so like I start dispatching everybody in space, and I'm on the phone with our central dispatch for ALS, and they're like, what's it for? I was like, I have no idea. And they were like, can you try? I've now called the officer 4 times. Nobody's answered. I'd called the sergeant. Nobody's answered. So now I switch gears from what's wrong with that child to what's wrong with my officer.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I tell that story to the critical incident, and the officers, well, one of the officers in the room was like, I think we knew that it was the child. And the state trooper who was holding the class got up and was like, hold on a minute, it's not your turn to talk. And he's like, but you need to realize that this girl, she is told, she is trained, she goes home every day thinking that your heartbeat is directly tethered to her desk. And when you stop answering the radio, she no longer cares about that child, that caller, those things. She is now processing what's wrong with my officer. And how dare you take that moment away from her, because she was worried about you in that moment. You. She wasn't worried about anything else that she had just mentally processed. She was worried about you. And he's like, you owe her an apology for thinking about you in that moment, because you stopped. You stopped speaking and communicating to her. So her ears just, they're not designed to be like, oh, something tragic has happened with the child. It's something tragic has happened to my officer. And that's a different, like, when you put that in perspective to a bunch of cops who are like, how hard can it be? Monkeys can dispatch. You forget.
Right.
You forget that, like, it's more than that. Our jobs are bigger than that. It's bigger than what happened to that child on scene. What was happening to my officer? Did he come across somebody who had the child and got shot? Like, could that have been, it could have been a thing. But, I don't know that, because I can't see that. I can't touch that. It's not tangible to me. I can't put my fingers in it. I'm based on blind vision at that point. And I feel like, that's where it would do us a really big justice to tell our dispatchers, you're going to deal with some shit in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's going to shift gears on you like that. And you're going to get gut checks like that. And it's going to feel terrible because you can't do anything about it. You're stuck. Like, I can't run out there and be like, are you guys okay? Like, is everybody all right? You good? All right. Tell me what we need. Like, I can't do that. I'm dependent on what the caller's telling me, what my officers are telling me, what my fire department's telling me, what my EMTs are telling me. I'm dependent on that. And that's a really difficult place to be in that space. And like I said, it was different for me because I had a lot of field experience, which was super beneficial. And I recommend anybody who is going to do this get some field experience and be out there and see it. But that was, like I said, that was a hard year. There were 7 different calls, and I still live with those 7 calls every day of my existence. And they don't prep you for that sort of stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that is definitely something that we should be telling people, and I think it is changing. I think it's definitely changing now. It's been changing for a while. For you though, with all of this that ended up happening, especially that one time where all of these different, just things that were going on, that stick with you and all, where did it change? Was it around that time that things started changing for you in the aspect of, we need to talk more about this stuff? Because I was the same as you when I started out. No one really talked about anything. Like, I would sit down with my chief sometimes and he would tell me stories, and I've always been fascinated, with stories and everything. So, I would listen to a lot of things, that happened to him during his time, early on as an officer, up to, working to be the chief of police. But then, moving back home to Southwest Michigan and working for the dispatch center, in the county that I grew up in, a lot of people on the west side, I knew a lot of them. So I'm answering calls from family members, friends, and all this other stuff. But no one really talked about any of the calls. Like, we would talk about some of the calls, but not the way we're talking now. Like, we wouldn't put that personal touch onto it. It would just be like, oh yeah, man, I took this call, this happened to, this person or whatever. And then we go on. And that was kind of the extent of what the conversation would be. But for me, I hit a burnout, and I was trying to figure out what to do. Like, what is it that's bothering me? What's the issue? And it was, I didn't have an outlet. I didn't have someone to talk to about some of these harder calls that I was going through. So then, I'm back in school. I'm doing these projects. I'm writing about my calls, and people are really getting into them. Learning so much more about dispatch and why we do what it is that we do. It was therapeutic for me. So I just continued to go on with it. But so for you though, there was a moment, and we kind of talked about this in the beginning, before we started recording. There was a moment, I guess, that happened where things kind of started changing around for you, and you started realizing, we do need to talk more about this stuff.
So, and it's so funny that like full circle here I am talking to you. But I found this video, and I was probably in the rabbit hole working night shift at the time. And I was on, Facebook, or maybe it was MySpace. I don't know how long ago this was, but I'd found this YouTube video, and it was set to music, and it was slides of calls that dispatchers had shared. Some of them were good, and some of them absolutely tragic. And I remember watching this. I was actually on the desk, and I was watching sort of this video, and it was your video, and I'm not cheesing it up. It's not like I'm just here with you and I'm telling you this, like it was old. It was, like I bet you if you go back to my Facebook page, you'll find it, because I end up sharing it on my Facebook page, set to music. And I remember getting like teary-eyed, and that was the first time that I had ever gotten teary-eyed when it came to relation with my job. I'm not a crier. Well, there's some people that'll tell you that's different, but I'm not a crier. I'm not a super huge emotional person, because I think we just become callous doing the things that we do. So I don't really have an emotional response to calls, so to speak. And I remember like watching these slides and reading these stories and going, how do I get my story told to this man? Like, where is this person? I need to find this person, because I need to tell him I've got calls I need to write down and tell him about to get them out of my brain. And I remember so I watched that evening, and I was off for 2 days, and I came back in for overtime on a day shift, and it was like a perfect spring morning, and it was silent, and it's like 5:30 in the morning, like nobody's around, the streets are rolled up, everybody's asleep except for us people who work shift work. And right. I'm walking into headquarters, and I stopped at the glass doors, and I stood there, and I took like a super deep breath, and I said out loud, this can't be it. And that was the pivotal moment of my career. And I want to say that was like 2011, 2012. I don't remember when it was. I just remember it being probably like 11, 12 years into my career. I had gone through 9/11. I had gone through watching emergency systems crumble and Katrina. I had gone through Sandy. I was in the EOC for Sandy. I'd been through so many things, and I'd experienced, I had touched so many lives and so many traumatic events. And I was just like, wow, this isn't any fun anymore. I don't know what I need to do differently. And I remember a few times asking for training, go get certifications. And I was really laughed at. I was told, you don't need training. Why do you need that? You're just a dispatcher. Oh. Favorite sentence, right? Yeah. Cringe.
Yes. Oh.
And I remember posting your video to my Facebook page, and I'm fairly positive if you go back far enough, you'll see on there some of the police officers I worked with commenting blah, 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 blah. And it was super disrespectful in that aspect, because it was we do so many things. So I started using my Facebook page as a little bit of a platform, and I would do public lessons, and it would be public lesson 319. Please stop dialing 911 because deer are not an emergency. It was, I was trying to make it lighthearted, but also educate the public a little bit on what we do and don't do when you call 911. And I remember it was it was getting a lot of like funny response from friends and stuff, because now to this day they'll still say things like, so I have a deer in my, like, they'll tag me and be like, I have a deer in my backyard, should I call 911? You know, like, so it's like, at least it opened the conversation amongst friends and family a little bit about the space of what we do and how we do it and where it goes, and how out of left field some of our calls can be, and why do people dial 911 for that? Like, these people are like, people dial 911 for that, and I'm like, yeah, they dial 911 for that.
Yes.
You know, so it was like I was able to use, like, jumping off of what you had done, I decided like social media is a good place to kind of put some of the calls in a really generic context, but like the funny ones, like not the, you know, not the hard ones, but the funny ones, or the dumb things people call us for. And I put that out in space, and it started making me feel a little bit better. And I had actually finished my associate's degree in public safety and was laughed at by coworkers. They were like, what do you need that for? That's a Mickey Mouse degree. And it was like, I don't think they understand that that stuff stuck with me, because it made me think that there's nowhere to go in this space. So you mean that this is it? Like, I'm going to sit here and take beatings from callers, take beatings from cops, take beatings all around, but have no avenue, have no out, have no like future. Like, is there a future in this? And that's where I started kind of looking into 911 in the space as it is. Like, does it necessarily have to be in a center? Can it be somewhere else? Because there's got to be people that like build our systems, right? Like, that has to be a thing. Right. That's when I started looking at like the E&P program, and I started like looking further along the lines of like, what do I need to do to better myself? The police department would not entertain me getting my E&P, so I, you know, attempted to pay for it myself. Suffered a medical emergency, couldn't take the test that day. But it was like, these were the processes. It was like, it was hard to try to unstick myself, because I was convinced I was just a dispatcher. I didn't need any further training. I didn't need to talk about my calls, because how hard could my job be? And yeah, and it was like, but I know it's hard because I've seen somebody else say that this is hard, and show that it's hard, and that there's people processing information like I am, especially at that point. I think it was like 12 or 13 years in. So I was like, you know, so there has to be something in space for this. And that's, you know, where I started to find that moment, like that change. It was watching that video. It was telling me that there's other people out there that are just like me in this world, that are going through these moments and really have no outlet, because nobody wants to listen to it. Not in your space anyway. And I was like, but maybe they do. Maybe they do want to have these conversations. So that's where I started looking and started trying to branch out and trying to find other places to go. And I found Mountain Valley. So 17 years later, after being held hostage by my first job, I finally broke free and came to a different setting to see what that looked like. And it's amazing what a transition that was, and where it kind of led me from there.
Wow. See, that's why I said earlier that it seems like from the beginning of your career, when they slap down that application, if you think you can do it better, apply. And you did. Early on, you took on that challenge. The challenge was accepted. And it looks, I mean, not that it just looks like it. You did. You've lived it, and you're working it now. You accepted the challenge, and you continue to evolve, and you want to change things. I mean, you end up seeing that video, which is that's an awesome story. Thank you for sharing that. And you start realizing for yourself too that there's more people out there that are dealing with the same shit. And that was one of the things that I found out with, you know, putting that out there, and this getting as big as it has been, people sending in messages saying that they now know that they're not alone. Like, they've felt alone for so long, and people had been bearing so many stories. One person specifically, I remember, sent a message in to the podcast page on Facebook, excuse me. And after their story, they added, my hands are still shaking from typing this because I've been holding on to it for so long. Yeah. Thank you for this outlet. And because people were sharing these stories anonymously, you know, they don't have to throw their name on it. They don't have to put anything else. It's just a glimpse into a call that they took and something that they had been holding on to. And that's what it was. People just started sharing and sharing and sharing because they finally had the ability to do so. And so many people were learning from each other and again realizing that they're not the only ones. Some people were in training and sending in messages saying, I thought this was going to be it. I thought I was the only one dealing with this stuff, but there are people who have been doing this for years who are dealing with it still. And I'm learning from them and they're going to learn from me. And I just thought, wow, it just continues and continues. And it's amazing. Like we were finding closure in each other with
Yeah.
just sharing stories. That's that power of storytelling. And for you, you continued on. So, you go from dispatch. Now, before you ended up moving up to executive director, and all this change and everything is going on, this kind of fire that's lit within you to create change and also possibly mold those new folks who are coming in as well into this profession, to teach them what you were not taught. Did you go to supervisor and then to a trainer, or did you go directly to executive director where you're at now?
As with all things with my career, things they're really weird. I was here about 2 years, and the director at the time calls me into his office, and he was like, "I'm creating this position." Shout out to Scott, because apparently he saw something in me I did not see in myself. He was like, "I'm opening this position. It's a deputy director title, and if nobody here wants it, it's not happening." And I'm standing there just blankly staring at him, and he's like, "So if you don't accept it, it's not happening. And if I find out you told anybody, I'm done with you." And I'm like, I mean, I'm looking in the direction of where I was standing at the time, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, what about this person? What about that person? And he looks at me and he's like, "Are you talking yourself out of a promotion?" And I like grabbed my head and I sat down in the chair, and I was like, "Oh, hold on a minute. I need to wrap my head around this for a second." And I was like, "They're not going to be happy." And he's like, "Nobody in that room is qualified." He's like, you have degrees, you have background in emergency management, he's like, "You have all this experience." And he's like, "Have you seen your resume?" I was like, he's like, "You wrote it, you wrote it, right?" And I was like, I was just looking for a change of environment. Like I never in a million years imagined, like I knew there was upward mobility here and that was appealing. But I never thought to that extent. Like I never was like deputy director. I'm sorry, what? Why? Me? Are you sure? You talking to me? Because I'm just a dispatcher. That's what I've been told. I'm told I was just a dispatcher. And yeah, so I remember telling him I needed a minute because I was like, this isn't going to go well. And yeah, so I accept it. I knew months ahead of time that this was happening, and he waited for me to go on vacation before he sent the email out. So I was standing in the middle of Animal Kingdom in Orlando when he sent the message, and it was, "I'm doing this, and it was like this little line, and Keely has been promoted to deputy director." And I felt like I, in that moment, didn't even have an opportunity to really celebrate it because I knew how it wasn't going to be really very well revered on the floor. And I understand why. I do. Because I would have felt the same way if I had been in that place. And I remember thinking to myself, "Oh my God, I can't go back there. Oh my God, I can't go back there." And for the first, 7-ish months, 8 months of my deputy director title, I had to train somebody for my position. And then I finally kind of came out to my office and I cleaned it up and I started working on training because that's where my background is. I worked for Rutgers University with the training division. I have all these training, like train the trainer certs. I do the training thing, right? And about 36 seconds later, he announced that he accepted a job across country. And by that January of 2020, he was gone and I was alone. I was named the interim director, and then a pandemic broke out. So here I was by myself in the middle of a pandemic where things are rapidly changing. I was given about, 45 minutes of training on payroll and finances and budget and told, "Don't screw it up, but it won't be your problem when the new director comes because that'll be their job. But for now you have to pay your people and keep the lights on." And I was like, I had a USB drive that was left on my desk. I have a picture of it. That's all that I was given. And it was like directions on how to do things. And then
Oh,
the pandemic breaks out. So my guts felt like jelly. And
wow.
so yeah, so then it was like end of April, I think they finally named a director, and now I have to onboard said new director, Jeremy, who you know,
Yeah.
and I had to onboard him in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of all this, and then he also hires a training QA/QI coordinator. So now I have to train her on how to give things to the state. But Sarah's great. Like, she picks up on stuff like that. Like, she's super quick. So like, I'm doing both of those things, still navigating finances because we haven't really established who's doing them, who's not doing them. And in the meantime, we onboard a new payroll system, and my HR director leaves, and I now take on the HR component too. So it's like, I have no idea. Like, everything came at me like, I don't even like. It was like the best description. A gentleman I just had a great Zoom with the other day called it, I was drinking water out of a fire hose. And that's exactly what it felt like.
Oh man,
Yeah,
you went through a lot,
yeah,
and in
in
a
a
short
very
time.
short amount of time.
But I mean, from what it sounds like, you kind of were, in a way, prepared for all of this. Just all the experience that you have and coming into it. But it's weird though, right? When we're in this profession, and maybe any profession really, but I'm just speaking on dispatch alone, that we don't. Um, we don't always want like a thank you, or you did so good on this or whatever. Some people end up saying, well, I was doing my job or whatever. But it's good to get that recognition. But when we do get the recognition, what happens? we're,
Like,
we're like, oh,
shut
oh,
down. Yeah. Like,
thanks.
no, die.
Thanks. Right, yeah. You're like, all right, cool. 911, where's your emergency?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, can I just it's we're people who don't like to be front and center, otherwise we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. And I really feel like, it becomes like, even in the last month I've done, now this is my like third podcast, like this is not a space that I've ever worked in before, but like, it's like trying to come out of your comfort zone just to tell the stories so that people can see that, this is the crazy world of dispatch that we're in. And these are the things that happen, and you need to know about them because nobody told me about them. It'd be really
Right.
great to have a warning. We should come with like, caution tape and stuff and be like, here you go, here's your new job. Use this. Use this in case of an emergency.
Yeah. Here's a list of some of the shit that you're gonna have to go through and what you should prepare for.
Yes.
So as we go into the wrap up of this episode, which has been amazing to have you on, this has been so much fun. Thank you for doing this. I want to switch to something really quick here, and I want to see where this came from. And listening to your story, I feel like this kind of stems from the debriefing that you were at, where the officer started talking out of turn during your time. So in the background, for those who are watching, for those who are listening, you can just imagine this. In the background of your screen, there is something red up there that looked like a red cross, but it's actually an Elmo. It's actually Elmo. And so there's Elmo tossing.
They have elbow tossing.
So explain this.
So when the pandemic, right before the pandemic broke out,
Mhm.
I was the interim director. I was learning as I went, and we had some morale issues going on, as do all dispatch centers. I'm not calling my people out at all. This is not unique to just our area. And I was trying to find a way for them to all have a voice. And, I figured, we should probably get together and have a meeting, because like, this is like, I'm at the helm now, and it's weird because I wasn't 15 seconds ago. And
Yeah.
so I put them in meetings together, in their own groups, so in their own shifts. And what I did was I brought Elmo in, and I kind of gave them the basic rules. This is a safe space. I want you all to feel like you can talk even though I'm here. I'm one of you. I'm not your boss. I'm just listening, and I'm letting you guys talk about things you need to talk about, whether it's calls you've gotten, whether it's a discrepancy with one of your coworkers, whether it's, you didn't like what you had for lunch today. I don't care. I just want us to start talking to each other, because I feel like that gets lost in the mix. But you can only talk when you're holding Elmo. So if you are not holding Elmo, you're not allowed to talk out of turn. You're not allowed to speak. You are not allowed to cut somebody off while they're talking. And then after that, I was like, so who wants to go first? And I also gave them the option to have union representation there in the event that things took a left turn. So that was up to them. You want your union rep here? Do you not? And most of them voted to not have him there, because they were like, oh, we don't want anything in space that he can attest to. But I did give him that, because I said, this isn't an official meeting. This is just, let's talk. And so I would ask, like, as soon as I got started, so who wants to go first? And they would all sit there and look at each other, and I would just like peg somebody in the head with it. And so it kind of went from there. It actually started with the role of, I originally had a stapler, and I was like, this could get really ugly. So I took the stapler away, and I had a roll of paper towels for the first meeting that we did. And then after that, I went home, and I was like, I'm a single parent. So like, we get creative a lot of times. And I saw this Elmo sitting there that he didn't particularly play with. And I was like, Elmo, everybody loves Elmo. So even if you hate Elmo, you love Elmo.
Right.
So I brought Elmo in, and that's where Elmo came from. So Elmo hangs out in my office. And, since there's been so much change in the last 16 months, we haven't had another Elmo meeting, but that is my intention, is to have another Elmo meeting where people can just talk and vent. And I don't care what it is. And I think that as leaders in these spaces, we need to remember that sometimes our people, even if they've got a gripe with you, just need to vent. And it's not necessarily about you. It's about the overall design of something, or the overall way that things had been laid out from the beginning. And even a bit of humble pie can do us some good as leaders. And we're the only ones who can shape how 911 goes forward. And, we've come a long way. We have definitely done better by our people. We've done better by our training programs. We've done immensely better by our technology. But I think what needs to change now is our leadership, and moving our people up through the process, and giving these people the tools that they need to become advocates for 911, because we get lost in the mix a whole lot. I mean, New Jersey just finally signed the act to make us first responders. That happened 3 days ago, and that's
amazing.
Huge. It's huge in this space, and people need to have those conversations and show that, like, we are the emergency response system. Like, that's us. And we need these people who are, even if they're just starting out yesterday, they're the people that are the end users, and they know how technology should look and what it could do to better. And if we start giving them the opportunities to train and realize that there's more places to go, imagine what those systems will look like 10, 15 years from now, when they're the ones who've come up through the ranks and built them, and they're the ones who've done it. And it wasn't some retired cop who thought a monkey could dispatch. Right. Like, it's a dispatcher who grew up in the ranks, who came up through the bowels of within the trenches. They came up through there, and they designed these systems, and they're telling us what needs to happen next. That's big. And I think that's where leadership has to go. We have to give our people voices, and let them speak, and let them vent, and let them yell. And if they're yelling, just don't take it personally. It's not really about you. It's, it might be about you. I'm not going to, maybe it is about some of y'all out there, but just give them that chance. I wasn't given those opportunities. I wasn't given those voices. I was told to, like, sit down and be quiet, and I don't want to be quiet anymore.
Perfect. Oh, that is amazing. Thank you so much for being on. That was a perfect ending. that was awesome.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for the job that you do, and for coming on and sharing these stories. This is what's needed. So thank you so much.
Anytime. You're my hero.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll be right back here with you in just one second. For those who are watching right now, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can check us out on Twitter. You can follow us, and that's going to be at 91 Podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Within the Trenches Podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital, Rapid Deploy, as well as Carbine. And if you're looking for any bonus content, you want to help support us, you can check us out, and that'll be patreon.com/WTT Podcast. This episode can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter, and you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we will see you in the next one.